I call them the 10 I's of vulnerability. The I. The first one, and they are not in any order of priority to my mind, these are equally important and equally challenging to the people who actually face the issues day in and day out in the slums. The first to my mind is illegality. If you look at the definition of illegal, it means unlawful. However, the illegal occupation of lands, and this illegality is coming primarily from land, is not unlawful. It has not been procured in an unlawful manner. So there is a very, very formal system and a similar system that prevails in the regular market, land market, that also allows people to actually procure huts and houses in the slum areas. But because we've deemed it is illegal, we've actually transferred a kind of lawlessness onto the slum dweller. The second comes from identity, which we've been talking about all this while. And I think that is critical because it links you to eligibility. You have to produce papers, you have to show evidence of your stay in a city for a certain period of time. But the fact is that it is very challenging for the poor to procure IDs. The most difficult of these being the ration card, and the easiest being the voter ID card. And now, thankfully, the UID is coming through. We hope that that would actually provide whatever reservations people have, but I think the poor are going to really be able to use that in order to get entitlements. The third I is the informality, and this informality is coming from the nature of work and the nature of housing. The situation in Savda Ghevra since 2005, I mean, what you see is, I would say, a much improved picture that has been presented. The informality, the only thing that I'd like to pick from this informality of work is this fact that there are no social safety nets or even saving systems. And we have savings and mattresses which kind of erode whenever there is a fire or whenever there is a flood. So there are a lot of challenges that are attached to informality. The fourth I is, which I have, is for insecurity. And this insecurity, of course, tenure insecurity, we've been talking about there, but there are threats from other systems, other departments, and other agencies. For example, in the city of Agra, the difficulty of moving in services into the slum settlements didn't come so much from the fact that people didn't have tenure, but from the Archaeological Survey of India, which defined the perimeters or the boundaries within which people could actually invest in their own housing. So there are insecurities which actually make it much more difficult for people to invest in their own improvements. The inequity which is legislated. In a city like Delhi, we have a Delhi High Court judgment which clearly says that provisioning of services to the poor is like rewarding thieves. So and somehow, you know, it actually translates and trickles down into preambles and master plans somewhere. And we do know, and because we worked in Savda Ghevra very intensively for the last 5 years, we know that the master plan of Savda Ghevra actually didn't even consider provisioning of formal services network to the city systems. I mean, apart from the fact that the next I is infeasibility, because it was 30, I think it's 40 kilometers from the city center. Apart from the fact that extending the services up to Savda Ghevra or a resettlement colony, which is so far, would take you a minimum period of 5 to 6 years. And now, as the metro is moving closer there, the connectivity is improving. But the fact is that it's not there on the mind maps there's a blind side to what kind of services you can provide. I for infeasibility, which is technically difficult to connect. Are we saying in a slum-free city, should we in situ upgrade each and every slum? What about slums that are on drains? What are our slums that are on transport corridors, which could be very dangerous for children, where the corridor, where the width between the railway line and the housing could be very close? I from invisibility, which is that you're not even mapped, you're not counted. We've recently come out of the social audits that we've done in Ambala and Agra, and we found that the most excluded were the women-headed households. The widows who were, trying to work their way to try and feed a family of children, and who didn't know, or who didn't have the time, or who couldn't afford the opportunity cost of getting access to something which they should have got. And in Agra, we've seen, I mean, it's clearly visible that this house is a kacha structure and requires to be developed, but because the person cannot produce the lump sum upfront capital required for this kind of housing, you are missed from the system. The inability and the lack of influence, I would say, is another, and that links to your voice, the ability to have a platform where you could actually talk to the government, to actually say what you want to, and to get the services by entitlement and to your demand. We've tried working this through the Bhagidari and the Sanja Prayas, and we think that that model has, now that it is less elitist, but it is stopped somewhere. It's gone up to a point, and then the administrative systems, which brings me to the next one, which is the inflexibility of the systems to actually engage with the poor and to actually to provide or extend services to the poor. In Bhagidari, it was a very strange thing that we had to go through, was that community processes were not understood in the administration, not understood in the finance department totally. And the 10th, of course, is the lack of investment. The fact that there are limited resources, and we've been hearing that there are resources which we can unlock from the communities itself, and I think we need to start looking at how we unlock that capital. As I said, there are no clear answers, there is no one answer, and there are no quick solutions. I think what we are looking for are a series of small incremental steps towards change. Thank you.